Imagine sleeping peacefully one spring night. Then on Wednesday, April 18th, 1906, at 5:12 a.m., everything starts to convulse. You have absolutely no idea what's going on. As you rush out of bed and try to walk, you fall to the ground, failing to get back up. Next thing you hear is your china cabinet crashing to the floor. Finally, after the longest 40 seconds of your life, the shaking stops. In disbelief, you attempt to run outside. When you finally finish the obstacle course, which is your house, you see what has happened, as seen here on my visual aid. Your entire world smashed, glass shattered, people trapped, awaiting a hero or accepting death. You rush over and try to help anyone you can, but for many, it's too late. The San Francisco earthquake. It registered a 7.8 on the Richter scale. I can further explain that here in my geography model. By the end, 3,000 people had died, and it left 225,000 homeless. This was over half of San Francisco's population in 1906. 28,000 buildings, or 80% of my beloved city, were destroyed, and more than $400 million in damages was caused. The San Francisco earthquake remains one of the top 20 worst earthquakes in the U.S. and has the highest death toll of any disaster in California to this day. This is the disaster that changed my life forever. Imagine in 1906, there were a few trolley cars, but horses were mostly used for transportation, as seen here on my visual aid. For the time, there were a lot of buildings and lots of people. Everything looked good before the earthquake happened because everything was growing and busy. Then, unfortunately, on that fateful day, everything changed. This earthquake, just like all earthquakes, was caused by tectonic plates. See, the whole Earth is wrapped in a thick layer of crust, and it contains 7 major plates. They are always moving and bumping into each other. The tectonic plates have rough edges that sometimes cause them to get attached to one another. When this happens, the pressure builds up, and frequently the pressure gets so strong that the pieces end up separating and causing a powerful movement. This model I have designed will help explain this phenomenon. There were some tragic and unimaginable things that happened to the people of San Francisco that day. Some people were violently crushed by buildings that collapsed, and many had to leave their homes and everything in them because it was inevitable that they would collapse sooner or later. I remember how hard it was for the authorities to keep people in line. People were going insane. A vivid and shocking memory is that if somebody did not follow the rules that were put in place, they could be shot by authorities right in front of everyone. It was called the shoot to kill order. Fires started. Some people say 90% of the damage was actually caused by the fires that ravaged the city for 4 days straight. As you can imagine, these images are burned into my brain forever. At one point, amidst the chaos, I got lost. Fires were still going on. I wandered off to try to find some water for my family. I had never appreciated getting a drink when I wanted one so badly on March 18th, 1906. I saw a woman trapped, and she was screaming for help. By the time I could get to her, she couldn't even talk. I tried so hard to lift the piece of brick off of her, but I couldn't. I looked around, hoping my mother and father were next to me and willing to help, but when I looked around, I realized they were nowhere to be found. I had become disoriented, and my surroundings had changed into something completely unrecognizable. When I finally walked away from the woman, I felt so bad, but I needed to find my parents before I too was crushed by falling debris. I finally found them next to City Hall, where some people were meeting their families who were lost. I was so relieved and filled with joy in that moment, but all I could think of that night was what happened to those people I saw. Did they make it out alive? I was so young. I will die with the guilt of not being able to help that woman. In 1906, the San Francisco earthquake did an incredible amount of damage to the people in the community, as seen here on my visual aid. Because of all this damage, there was a lot of recovering to do. Things like food and blankets and tents were sent from other countries to help prevent more people from dying from lack of shelter and starvation. Most people who survived the earthquake ended up homeless. However, many did eventually find some sort of shelter. My family and I stayed at Golden Gate Park until we were offered an earthquake shack to live in. There were 5,610 of them donated to our city. Each month we had to pay $1 to $2 to stay there, or we would have to find a new place to live. Bread lines were how we got our food. It was so scary knowing there might not be enough food for me each day. When that happened, I would lay in the shack at night and focus on how hungry I was. I can still hear my stomach rumbling. However, the faint smell of burning flesh usually took care of my appetite. With all of the dreadful things that had happened during the earthquake and fires, there were some good outcomes. A big outcome was that San Francisco learned a lesson and revised their building codes in case another earthquake came. Along with better building codes, they rebuilt their city better than it was before. At one point, it had become necessary to dynamite portions of the town so they could completely start over with the rebuild. However, that led to some fires that burned out of control. Sadly, during the rebuilding process, there were thousands of draft horses brought to town, but they were simply worked to death. This is why you should always have your note cards in order and not start until they are. Even though it was a terrible event, this changed San Francisco forever. On the day of the San Francisco earthquake, there were 27 other earthquakes. The only thing that brought me some comfort was finding my very special Crayola crayons in the rubble. Unfortunately, the unpleasant and miserable memories will always stay with me. However, there was one building started before the earthquake, and miraculously, it survived. It was called the Columbus Tower. I go there every year and sit on the park bench, wondering if I will ever experience something like this again.